Good morning and welcome to the Pittsburgh Current Podcast. I am smiling editor and publisher Charlie Dietz because we were having a pretty good, spirited pre-show conversation with my guest today, Penguins Network, Penguins Radio Network's own Brian Metzer, a.k.a. Brain Metzger. Brian, thanks for coming in today, man. I appreciate it.
Hey, anytime I can bring the brain back to the studio, that's our ongoing joke, right?
Now that Heenan's dead, we could call you Brian the Brain. now that the late, great Bobby is gone, we could bring back Brian the Brain Metzger.
I used to get faxes from Allegheny County for my day job that's non-sports related, and this guy, Lionel, that worked on there, used to send every fax titled to Brain Metzer. And I honestly feel like, and I pieced this together, after the fact, I would realize when I would speak to him on the phone, he would call me Bra-in. So I wondered if in his head he just thought that Brian was spelled B-R-A with a long A.
Yeah.
I-N. Bra-in.
Broughton. That sounds like, it also sounds like Irish, like Celtic.
Yeah.
Broughton. Say, Broughton, what you say?
That's exactly what it was.
Anyway, we're going to talk Penguins hockey. We're going to talk about our giving issue, the Pittsburgh Current. We put our giving issue out on the streets on Tuesday, and it's our giving thanks issue. And quite frankly, what we want you to do is to go there, read the stories, go into the directory, find a nonprofit that you support their mission, and give to them during this holiday season. And although, you know, a lot of these groups need your financial help the entire year round, most of us seem to, open up the wallets a little more around the holidays. So go there, and we'll talk to Brian a little bit about Brian wrote a piece on the Mario Lemieux Foundation, which we'll talk. You know what? Let's start out with that. Brian, so you
Is it going to be in your head now?
It is now, Brian. So, Brian, tell me, if you could tell me, Brian.
What's this nice little bit of fluff, Charlie?
So, Mario Lemieux, listen here now. I'll say, you wrote, see, it's because we switched to a Wednesday. It's because it's the holiday coming up. I've already had one Thanksgiving, so I've already got the turkey in the system, and so maybe that I think tryptophan has the opposite effect on me. It makes me a little crazy.
Yeah, you're through the roof.
It's like heron for me.
It's your espresso.
Exactly, turkey. Yeah, little foam on top, turkey with foam on top. So Brian wrote about the Mario Lemieux Foundation, which everyone knows. I will go out on a limb and say everyone knows the Mario Lemieux story in the background, and I think everyone knows that Mario has his foundation. But Brian wrote about the foundation as one of these great nonprofits to give to. Brian, talk a little bit about the Lemieux Foundation, and you talked to some folks for your story. Mario really is almost the quintessential person who gives back to the community. I can't remember the word I'm looking for, but you know what I mean. So talk a little bit about the foundation.
Well, it's amazing to see a guy like Mario Lemieux come to Pittsburgh as an 18-year-old non-English speaker. He's met at the airport by people. He's ushered into the city. He has to put this team on his back that was terrible at the time.
Yeah.
And that was the first time he saved the team, so to speak,
Right.
because he turned their fortunes around. And then, they finally win some Stanley Cups with Mario. He becomes one of the greatest, if not the greatest player in history, depending on who you ask. Then he has this cancer diagnosis, and that's what started this whole thing, because we're going to leave out the fact that he saved the team, pulling them out of bankruptcy and doing all this. I mean, the sports-related stuff everybody knows about.
Yeah.
But what happened is 25 years ago, he gets diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he got through that miraculously and just kicked its ass, to be honest, and comes out of his final radiation treatment, plays the game that night, and wins the scoring title, and sadly they don't win their third consecutive cup. But that got the seed planted that he wanted to help others go through that situation as well. And he wants to beat cancer as much as an individual as overall. So he started the Mario Lemieux Foundation with his wife, Natalie. They've raised $25 million over the last 25 years. They do that via the golf tournament that he used to have. It's not a public event anymore, but they still bring in athletes for it, and they get a bunch of contributions and donations. Yeah. So that happens. They have the Austin's Playrooms that they've developed, and that was kind of a neat thing, too, because he and Natalie realized that while his children, his younger kids that were dealing with Austin's premature birth, they were in the hospital for 70-plus days. With him, there was nothing for these kids to do, and they're bouncing off the walls, and then the families are stuck trying to entertain them.
Right.
So they have these playrooms that they put in place. They have a couple military ones now as well. There's 30 plus of them around the tri-state area, and some of the military ones are obviously nationwide. So you just see Mario constantly giving back. And to me, it's one thing to have a statue of him outside of PPG Paints Arena. The city should almost erect a statue to Mario somewhere like they did for a Mr. Rogers or Richard Caligiuri or someone like that because of his work for this region. I mean, it's really amazing to see the give back that came out of a personal tragedy, one that he overcame, obviously, and he's been cancer-free, you know, God bless him for that. But to see the way that he and his family have given back to this area, they've become honorary Pittsburghers. They live here still. They bought the house out in Montreal a couple years ago, but opted not to really move back there. And I think they're just going to be Pittsburghers for life. So it's a great story. I love that they've raised all the funds. And the real quote that captures the essence, I think, was the Paul Steigerwald quote.
Yeah.
And Staggy's known Mario since day one. That he worked in the marketing capacity for the Penguins back when Mario was drafted. And he's the guy that was this little whippersnapper that had to go pick up Mario at the airport.
Wow.
So that's why he and Mario have sort of formed a bond over the years, because it was almost like a baby duck seeing its mother for the first time. That's who Mario saw in the city, was Paul Steigerwald. So he's had a soft spot for Staggy ever since. And, you know, I think that's why they've helped each other all this time. So he really captured the spirit of the thing with that quote that he gave about Mario. But $25 million plus raised over the years, the Austin's Playrooms, which is such a great give back, and they just keep continuing to, as they say, giving others. They keep giving others a chance to win, which is a neat slogan, because that's what they do. They give all this stuff back, and people that are really in need and trying to fight cancer. They've built all these facilities for UPMC and others. I mean, it's the money they give is amazing to think, you know, and you like to see an athlete do that, because we all think about the money they make, but to see it being generated and given back to such a great cause is awesome.
Right. And philanthropist was the word, of course, I was looking for. But I know I can't let things go.
He's a hell of a philanthropist.
He is. What happened with the golf tournaments? Because I covered a few of those back in the day, and they were wild. They were crazy. Like, you know, people just would follow guys like John Elway from hole to hole. Why did that become a not public event? Do you have any insight on that?
You know what? I should look into that a little bit, because I remember being sort of disappointed about it.
Yeah.
Because it was a fun thing to go to as a fan. And I mean, because the people that would come in, you got Michael Jordan, Elway would be there, Dan Marino would come back, who we know he does a lot of great work for autism as well. So these guys all give back a little, and they all come together. You know, when Mario would have his thing, they all come. Mario would go to their tournaments and things to help raise money for their causes. And I don't know if it just got to be too much. It grew too much in a way.
Yeah.
And as you said, some of the crowds started getting a little wild.
It was nuts.
And it was at a country club that's a pretty nice one. And maybe I almost feel like maybe they weren't as happy anymore with having that crowd come in. It's a big cleanup, and stuff's getting trashed a little bit. But I don't know that. That's my own opinion. Sure. But generally speaking, it's really stunk to see it go private. And then now I didn't even hear much about it this year. So I don't know if they just changed directions. Yeah. What I think he's replaced it with, to be honest, is the fantasy camp.
Oh, right.
Because they do that and bring in, fans. They give them the opportunity to play. He brings in a bunch of his buddies. Grant Fuhrer was here last year. Paul Coffey comes back.
Yeah.
A bunch of retired guys. Ty Domi's always in town for it. I got to interview both of those guys last year. It was kind of a fun thing. Former Pens come back. Jay Caulfield plays, obviously. Colby Armstrong's involved. We've had Alex Kovalev come back into town and participate. And that raises a lot of revenue, because I think per head it's something like $15,000 to play. But that money all goes to the Mary Lemieux Foundation. They get their stuff and their jerseys and everything. So that happens. And the neat thing is some celebrities come and play in that. So Bill Burr was here in the past. Steve Byrne came in and played a couple of years. So you see that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like they've put the focus maybe on that fantasy camp, which is, I want to say that's 10 or 11 years of that right now. And that generates a lot of revenue. So maybe they just thought of that as something that was a little bit more in the wheelhouse. Even though Mario's an astute golfer and a very good golfer, maybe they figured that's a way to give back a little bit too, because your fans get fans who are capable of paying that fee, obviously, but they get to participate and play with some of their heroes. Yeah,
I mean, the assemblage of star power at those things. I think a foursome I saw once was Marino, Elway, Jordan. I don't know if it was Lemieux, but I don't remember who the fourth was. But those three guys in a foursome one year when I covered it, and when you would get to 18, it was just like just like you would see even crazier, I think, than like some tournaments regular golf tournaments you see on TV. It was amazing, and people were, would follow Michael Jordan from hole to hole, and it was just.
Well, they'd all have the stogies going.
Yeah. They were right. They were completely on like relaxed levels,
and those are legendary guys. I mean, it's not like you're just seeing some average player. I mean, these are all-time greats in their chosen sport. I mean, if you were putting a Rushmore together of pro sports, these guys could be in the conversation, and they're just they're there smoking cigars, and they're going out for like a scotch or a whiskey after,
making jokes.
And they'd have that big after party, I think, at Metropole too, and you'd hear the tales of just these guys kick back and telling stories. And that's where you would want to have been a fly on the wall.
Speaking of telling stories, there's a story going around that the Penguins kind of suck right now, Brian.
It's not a story.
Well, it's a true story.
Yeah.
What's going on? What's going on with the Pens right now? With the lost 9 of the last 10, 4 in a row, 5 in a row, 4 in a row,
4 in a row,
4 in a row. 9 of the last 10 they've lost. Made a big change when they traded for Pearson. So what's going on? What's going on with the Penguins? And I know that Jim Rutherford's trying to make big moves. I don't know how long that takes to sort of pay off, or if to know whether the move was right. But what's going on, man?
Well, I think the biggest issue with the team is their confidence is shot right now.
Yeah.
And when you have no confidence in any sport, I think that you just play worse. You overthink everything. You're just not yourselves.
Yeah.
So that's probably one of the big problems with this team. And I know that Brian Russ talked a little bit about that the other day. Some other players on that roster have talked about the confidence aspect of it. But everybody keeps pointing to them and saying that the league has caught up to them in terms of speed, etc. Biggest thing is when you look at them, they can't get out of their own zone. Mm-hmm. Their breakout just stinks right now. And that could be a lot to do with some injuries potentially, because just taking Justin Schultz out of that mix on the blue line has really hurt them. Yeah. It's hurt more than I probably anticipated it would.
Right.
So not having that right-handed shot that can make a breakout pass, that can help you on the power play, do all those little things, put a bigger onus on Chris Letang, who he's obviously playing very well this year. I think he's having one of his finest seasons in recent memory, but he can't do it all himself.
Right.
And he's making a handful of mistakes from time to time. He's had some giveaways, credited and not credited out there. So that's hurt them. I think that they've been caught flat-footed a lot in their own zone. When you can't get the puck out, they're running around a little bit. And as Phil Bourque would tell you, they're watching the puck a lot. They're not really getting on bodies. So teams are allowed to just pass it around and set up perfect plays. I mean, the Tampa Bay Lightning did that to them just a couple games ago, and it was ugly. So that was one of the bigger problems. Secondary scoring is a second issue, and I think that's what Jim tried to address by bringing in Tanner Pearson. Now, on paper, you see him send out a fan favorite in Carl Hagelin, who had just 3 points on the season, for Tanner Pearson, who had 1 assist, and it happened on opening night.
Right.
That's all he had this year. But now he's gotten his first goal as a Penguin. He had 4 shots on goal. He was physical. He threw his body around in his last game, and he's looked pretty good with Evgeny Malkin on that line. I liked it better with Phil Kessel. They tried it with Patrick Hornquist at first, but that still just gives you the top 2 lines when Sid's healthy. So I think they've got to find a good way to balance out the lineup. That will be alleviated a little bit with Derek Brassard coming back. So if they can get the secondary scoring and get out of their own zone a little quicker, stirring a little bit of goaltending, because that's been an issue. But I sort of believe the goaltending issue is tied into them not getting out of their own zone. There's some first saves being missed, but at the same time, excuse me, they're leaving their goaltending out to dry. Yeah. And those guys need to start making a big save from time to time. But to that point, there's times where they're making the big save, and then it's a rebound or a backdoor play where they're not covering a pass to the guy that's on the far post. They've probably given up more back post goals than I've seen in 3 seasons this year already, and we're only not even 20 games in. So that's a lot of win to not really explain why they're losing. But I just feel like there's a lot going wrong at once, that if they can start fixing one thing at a time, they'll be better off. And Sullivan's addressing the breakout probably first and foremost right now. That's something he's tried to tweak a little bit. And the talk is that they used to make a lot of passes up the wall, and teams are taking that away from them. So when their defenseman tries to pinch, they're picking off the pass and going the other way, chipping it past him, and they're not able to do what they've done. And that hurts them in the offensive zone, which then gets them flat-footed going back. And when they try and retrieve and get out, they go back up the wall, and that team is playing on the wall and taking that pass away. So it's the breakout's just broken. That's hurting them in their entire aspect of their game, and it's making them look slow.
Do you think that the move to trade Carl Hagelin, I'm not surprised. I mean, Jim Rutherford gave everyone fair warning that something was going to happen. Sometimes, you don't know if making a big move like that is just reactionary or you're just trying to mix things up a little. But do you think that was a move that he really thinks was going to help turn the tide a little bit, or was it a move for a big move's sake?
A little of both, maybe, because he did want to just sort of shake things up a little. And I thought Elliot Friedman, who works for, I believe, Sportsnet now, he's shuffled around a little bit, made a great point the other day. He said that Bob Murray of the Anaheim Ducks is one of these guys. Jim Rutherford's one of these guys. I don't know that necessarily the Kings situation is this, but there's old school general managers, and he mentioned Rutherford as one of them. He mentioned Bob Murray as one. He mentioned David Poile in Nashville as one, as guys that sometimes will just look for a comparable player to plug and play because you can swap them. It doesn't hurt your team that much. It doesn't help your team that much, but it sends a shot across the bow of your locker room.
Yeah.
And I think that was as much what he was trying to do as anything else. But to that, that said, I think he thinks Tanner Pearson has a higher offensive ceiling because he's a 24 goal scorer 2 years ago. And he thinks that if he can even get back to 15, 20, that's going to really help this lineup, getting a left winger specifically that can pump a couple of goals in. And if he plays like he did in the last game, I think he will be able to do that a little bit. But, I think sometimes there are trades that are made just to shake up the locker room. But in this case, it was one that was a shock and awe move, but one that he still thinks has offensive upside for his team.
And do you think that, I think anyway, but do you think that Hagelin is maybe the biggest name in the locker room that he could have moved without really changing things too much? But still, you're shipping out a team guy, you're shipping out a well-liked guy, a locker room guy.
Yeah.
Do you think he was probably the biggest name at this point, at least, that he could deal without taking too much flack from the fans? Although there's certainly been some backlash, but also without really kind of screwing up the core of the team there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it hurts a little just in that he's an awesome penalty killer.
Yeah.
But you can't pay a guy $4 million to just kill penalties well and be a fast guy. I mean, he wasn't scoring a lot, and that was something they considered. But the biggest thing as to why he was the easiest part to move is he's an unrestricted free agent after the year. So with that $4 million coming off the books, he gets Tanner Pearson at 3.75. The Penguins actually held some of the Hagelin money to even that out in terms of salary cap, but they have him signed for the next 2 seasons. So they have cost certainty with a player who's 4 years younger as well. I mean, because Haggy is 30.
Right.
So you have a 26-year-old making 3.75 that you have for the next 2 years, and you believe that you can get him back to being a 15 to 20 goal scorer. So that, in his view, was a move that helps them for today and in the next couple of seasons. So when you look at it that way, I think, yes, he probably was the easiest part to move. He still had a lure around the league. Teams that are looking to get a veteran presence, maybe a little bit more speed into their lineup, which the Kings definitely were, because they suddenly looked like a team that was sort of skating in quicksand. And it's crazy to think that because they have Anze Kopitar and Drew Doughty there that everybody thinks of with that lineup. But they're the speed guys. They're the leaders. But Dustin Brown has slowed down. I think Jeff Carter's slowed down a little bit. And it's a little older group that needed a little infusion of speed. Now, it's a shame they got a little older, even more so with Carl Hagelin, but they get the speed aspect. And the interesting thing is his first game with the Kings, which I didn't see what happened since, but in the first game he played over 16 minutes, which was his most time on ice of the season.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting.
Right.
They're going to use him maybe a little differently than the Penguins did. But I do agree with you. I think that's what it was.
Right.
He was the easiest piece to move, and it still sent shock, but maybe not as much shock as if they would have done something really drastic.
Right.
Like you hear people saying, trade Phil Kessel. Don't trade Phil Kessel. Trade Ole Mata. Don't trade Ole Mata. Right. So, I mean, some of these guys still really help the team win.
Yeah.
And I don't know that he wanted to do that so much as help him get a contract off the books that he knew he wasn't going to keep next year anyway.
Right. So looking ahead to let's look over like the next 3 months. I mean, the Penguins have been known to make, big deadline trade deals.
Sure.
But are you thinking that, or is there a chance that they're going to just kind of, do you think that they're going to make moves, bring in new players, make trades, as we sort of go through the season, or do you think that this is maybe it for the moment, or do you think Jim Rutherford's ready to? Would you maybe not count him out for making another big move.
Well, I never count him out just because he's one of the most aggressive general managers in the National Hockey League. It's worth pointing to, though, this is what one of the earliest trades he's made as a Penguins GM. He's always early. Mm-hmm. He goes in December typically or January, which the deadline falls in late February. Right. So he's always one of the first guys to strike in that situation. This year, though, this deal, I think he felt like he needed to do something to shake it up like we just talked about. It was only his second November deal. I think he has 2 or 3 December trades on his resume. The biggest would have been David Perron, happened in December, if I'm not mistaken. But, I think he will make more moves. What I think is going to happen is, if all goes well, you have Sid back tonight, according to what we're hearing. And by his own admission that he's feeling pretty good. Yeah. So you'd have your top 3 centers back in the lineup for the first time since October 25th. That's Sid, Gino, and Derek Brassard. So they might get those guys back in. That gets them a little bit more balance in their forward lines. And then they can consider, okay, what do we really have with this group? Give them a few games to do what they need to do, see if they can start scoring some goals, see if that helps them stop the skid that they're in right now. I mean, they're last place in the Eastern Conference. So that alone has him working the phones.
Yeah.
But this time of year, prices are so high, because everybody still fancies themselves as we're in it. We're in this race. We can make a run. We can do this. We can do that. Even though U.S. Thanksgiving is largely looked at as the mile marker for where if you're in a playoff spot, then I believe it's 76% of the time you're making the playoffs.
Wow.
It's really crazy with like 60-plus games left for most teams. So I think that getting past Thanksgiving, he'll let that happen. He'll play these guys a little bit, but then I think he'll start to look again. Right. I don't know that there's a deal to be made today. Prices are very high, so I think he'll get into December. If he still is struggling and sees his team not doing what they want to do, I think he'll then look to make another deal, and he'll continue to try and tweak as we move through the season all the way up until that trade deadline. And don't be surprised if he maybe makes two or three, maybe not very big impact deals, but other little things to tweak the lineup, setting up for maybe a bigger deal down the line that he can maybe change the dynamic of some group on this team. I know he wants a puck-moving defenseman again, because with Schultz out, you're getting him back, but you're not getting him back till March. And, we all told ourselves then that, he'll help us for the playoffs. Well, if you're not in a playoff hunt at that point, it doesn't really matter. Yeah. So he's got to address that. I think he will before it's said and done, but defensemen are so expensive. So you'll see something. I just don't know exactly when based on price, but he's always a guy that's working the phones and very aggressive.
You mentioned that the Pens are last in the conference. By record and points, they're one of the 3 worst teams in the NHL. Do you think they're one of the 3 worst teams in the NHL the way they're playing, or do you think it is a matter of things start to break differently or some things start to click? I mean, are they one of the worst teams in the NHL right now? I mean, obviously by record you could say that, but by the talent and potentially what you see could happen. I mean, do you?
What's scary is when you get to the quarter mark.
Yeah.
I mean, Denny Green comes in and says, they are who we thought they were.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I mean, it's like,
let him off the
hook. Now, I don't believe the Penguins are as bad as they've looked.
Yeah.
I mean, when you have Sid, Gino, Chris Letang, Phil Kessel, that alone should be good enough to win in the regular season. That maybe not always enough to win a Stanley Cup, but you would think that would be enough to get you some points, even loser points. They're not even getting the loser points now.
Right.
I mean, out of the 10-game skid here, they have the one win, and they have 2 loser points. That's bad. I mean, usually when the Penguins lose, they have a 10-game losing streak, but they've gone 2-2 and 6.
Right.
They're not doing 2-2 and 6.
Right.
So I don't think they're as bad as they have appeared to be, but they, at this point though, what's wrong? They got to get to the bottom of it. Is it just going to be an off year? We saw that with the San Jose Sharks a couple years ago. They came off the Stanley Cup run against the Penguins and didn't win the Cup, missed the playoffs right after that. Right. And then now they're back to being one of the better teams in the West over the last couple seasons. So is that what they are going to do here? Maybe have a year to tinker with some things, retool a little bit, and then set themselves up for the latter stages of the Sid Gino era, which that's a definite possibility. And for a team like the Penguins, though, Charlie, it's not a terrible thing to have one year where maybe you stink a little bit. Right. Because then you can potentially get yourself a high-round draft pick into the mix. And if they would somehow become a lottery team this year, you got a guy that a lot of people think is this next big thing, Jack Hughes, on the horizon. He's the number 1 overall draft pick next year. I don't think the Penguins are going to get the first overall by any means. Right. But if you could set that scenario up, it's not a terrible situation, because then You add to your center depth. You have a guy that could potentially replace one of Sid or Gino down the line once they would retire. But I don't like to think that way with this group because they still have a lot of talent. I think they're right there. But they got to start winning games.
Right.
I would say December is one of the biggest months in recent memory for this team because they got to make a lot of space up in the standings, win some hockey games. If they could come up with, getting themselves within a couple of points of a wild card or the top of their division, they'd be in pretty good shape. That's the one good thing they have going for them is their division now. They're only a handful of points out of third in their division. Right. Even being last in the conference, you're still right out of a playoff spot because if you make up that 5-6 points to get back into third in your own division, you're back into not even a wild card. You're in the playoffs.
Right, exactly.
So
let's talk about, we mentioned it, let's talk about goaltending. Is there some point that you just start thinking that while he's good, Matt Murray is maybe just too streaky or too slumpy to be like the long-term guy? Because, again, it hasn't been like he's had periods of dominance, but then he's also had periods of you wonder, what in the heck's going on?
Yeah.
I mean, is it and the backup,
DeSmith, Casey DeSmith.
I mean, that doesn't seem to be.
Well,
what's your assessment of that?
It's crazy because Casey. That's the thing. Casey DeSmith was the perennial, backup QB, guy that you just don't see a lot, or a utility player.
Yeah.
Because what would happen is people were calling for him to start because he looked so good early.
Yeah.
And he's that kind of guy that would come in. I think he can give you spot starts. I think he could even start, 20 plus games for you and do it at a high level. Can you ride him for, 10, 12 games in a row? I don't know because he's never been that guy. He does it in the AHL, obviously. But to do that at the pro level with just not having that pedigree, I don't know that it'll work. So he's got a couple shutouts this year. He's looked pretty good at times. I thought he was pretty good in this Buffalo Sabres game. However, he didn't have that big save you needed to win the game. I mean, they gave up a 4-1 lead, and then he lets up a tying goal that a lot of people think he should have had, and maybe even an overtime goal that he should have had, even though that's some pretty good players that scored those goals. So I think he is fine as a backup for this team. I think he can win games for them. Can he be the starter? I don't know. Now, to Matt Murray, he should be the guy. We all have seen him win 2 Stanley Cups. You saw what he did over those cup runs. Now, granted, he didn't shoulder the entire load himself. He had a little help, specifically in year 2, where Marc-Andre Fleury carried them up to the conference final, and then he picked up the ball and ran it the rest of the way. But he was a world burner. I mean, he had consecutive shutouts to end the Nashville Predators series. He's a guy that has shown that he can do that. He can play that style. I don't think by any means he's done or that he stinks or anything like that. I feel like he's another guy that is maybe dealing with a little bit of an issue with confidence right now. I think he's overthinking his game. As we talked about in our Penguins preview issue for the current, he had all those quotes talking about how much he studied his own game over the summer, and he broke that down a little bit and wanted to make himself better. I wonder if between him doing that and maybe a goaltending coach trying to get him to play more in that crab stance that we talk about so much, that screwed him up because he's a tall kid. I think he's 6'4". He's like 180 pounds. So he's not the widest guy, but he's tall. And he needs to play upright in his net. When he does that, I think he makes it harder for shooters. He takes away his angles better because he can stick his arms out. And say what you want about his glove hand. I still feel like when he's upright, he's better. His glove becomes a liability when he's low in the net because he just doesn't have the speed to get it up.
Right.
So if he can stand upright in the net, he has good lateral movement. He's maybe not the most athletic guy, which is what works well for the crab stance. If you're athletic, you're fine. You can pop around and slide side to side. I feel like, and he even mentioned it with the Yanni Gourde goal against Tampa Bay Lightning. That's the one of the 4 power play goals that they scored that everybody said, oh, that's the one he should have had. He said he overslid his mark, which took him out of position on his angle a little bit. He shouldn't have had to slide all that much. If he was upright in his net, he's just going to walk, he's just going to go on his skates. Right. If you're going on your pads and you're not as used to being an athletic goaltender sliding around, you could overslide a play. And I think that's what he did there. So he needs to just get back to being Matt Murray, and I think he'll be better for it. One other screen grab from that game I saw on the NHL Network. It was Mike Rupp talking about it, and it was the one Braden Point goal that was a backdoor play. Nikita Kucherov could have probably scored without even passing it around the horn to Point, but they chose to do that based on how Matt Murray was in his net. He was crouched down so low that you could see the shooter's view both corners above both shoulders were wide open.
Right.
And the way Kucherov is, he could have just lasered a wrist shot into one of those spots and scored, I feel.
Right.
And that's not Matt Murray at his best for me. He's got to be upright in his net. He's got to take away angles better, and I think he'll be better for that moving forward. I liked his brazen type answers yesterday. You know, he's asked, should you be playing more? That's not up to me. He says it kind of with venom.
Yeah.
Would you like to play more? That's up to the coach. You know, like all these kinds of things. But that almost sounds like him getting his swagger back a little, where when he's peeved, I think he's a better player too. Early this season, they went with the Smith over him for a handful of games. And he was talking the same way. He came in, and all of a sudden he has the shutout against the Toronto Maple Leafs. Right. He played so well in Western Canada. Maybe you've rubbed him wrong. He's going to come in and help you stop the bleeding right now because, a peeved Matt Murray, I think, has done well for the team, and hopefully that's what he is now because he's got to get back to being what we thought him to be. Now, the rest of the season, to your point, is a big telling moment in history for him because if he's not good, then you have a window of time going back to last season where he hasn't been that guy. And then you start to worry because you gave up what is going to, by all rights, be a Hall of Fame goaltender, which I'm not that guy. I'm not saying you kept the wrong guy. So take that out of your vernacular. They did not keep the wrong guy for what they're doing here in Pittsburgh. But then do you have to address your goaltending? Mm-hmm. Because if you have Sid and Gino for the next, 3 to 5 years, you want to make sure you can win as much as you can over that span. And if Matt Murray's not the guy, Jim Rutherford's got to identify that, make a tough decision, and find somebody who can help them win. Yeah.
This is the Pittsburgh Current podcast, and we're here with Brian Metzer. We're talking all things Penguins hockey. We're going to switch here in a minute, but you can read Brian every week on PittsburghCurrent.com, his thoughts and insights and some interviews with the Pittsburgh Penguins. And Brian, one final thing on the Penguins I want to talk to you about because, look, we go back to when Dan Bilesma won his first cup. He was a mid-season replacement because the Penguins were playing bad. You knew I was going to ask this, I think. You go back to Mike Sullivan's first cup. He was a mid-season replacement because, things weren't going well. Does Sullivan have anything to worry about here, do you think? I mean, is it one of those situations that could develop? I mean, you're talking about a guy's first really down time.
Yeah.
So is there, and I'm sure there are people out there like, you just solely you could get somebody in there and win the cup, but is that even on the table, do you think, at this point?
I never discount anything with Jim Rutherford just because of the aggressive nature as we talked about. But I really don't believe that's in the offing here. He and Jim get along so well. They have a great working relationship. Sure, you can look at a couple of things and say, are they on the same page? I mean, for me, that comes down to the Ryan Reeves trade last year. Yeah. Was Mike Sullivan on board with that because he chose not to use the guy to the point where you decided to trade him after you gave up assets to get him? Daniel Sprong comes to mind because Jim, when you hear him talk, he sort of says things that lead you to believe he should be in the top 6. Mike Sullivan chooses to use Dominic Simone in that role, maybe a little bit more than Daniel Sprong. One other thing with Simone, Jim said on his GMJR show on the Penguins Radio Network 2 weeks ago that he felt Simone is better served being in the bottom 6. Sully almost always uses him in the top 6. Right. So, I mean, are those things not on the same page? Possibly. Yeah. But I think that they're open-minded enough to work with one another and work through those things. Right. I don't believe that even though it's been a recipe for success for the Penguins to make the midseason coaching change because of history, I just don't know that that's going to happen. Now, they just inked Sully, a year ago to his new contract, and it looks like he's still beloved here by the organization. It seems like his players still respond, even though I've heard fans say they're not listening to him anymore. Right. Well, the personnel's different. I mean, they've had injuries. There's a lot of things to play into that. It's just not playing his – and people even think he can be stubborn at times. I think any successful coach is. They know what's worked for them. They know they can tweak it and have it still work. So I think they're going to – he has a little longer leash than a lot of these guys. I mean, we've seen 4 coaching changes in the NHL already this season. Some named guys, too. I mean, Joel Quenneville got fired from Chicago, for Pete's sake. I mean, he's the winningest coach in NHL history at this point. So I think that there's probably even people out there that, and I joked about this at home a couple times, like to your point about the Yinzer Nation maybe saying, fire Sully, won't they do that? Bring in Q. They could bring in Q. That would be crazy. Yeah. You know what? If you're going to do something here, that's the kind of crazy move you should make. Right. You don't bring up the AHL coach again because that's the other dynamic here. Right. Almost every time that I can remember a coaching change in Penguins' recent history, it's been a broadcaster in in 3 or 4 AHL coaches.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? It's like you went Eddie O, you go Mike Therrien comes up from the AHL, Bilesma comes up from the AHL to replace him, and that's where Mike Sullivan came up from. The only one that was off the beaten path was Mike Johnston, and you took him out of junior hockey.
Right.
So they don't ever go for the big name coach. So it's
right.
you can't. I don't think that they're going to fire Sullivan, but if you do, I would love to see that A-bomb mentality where that happens. And hey, we're bringing in Joel Quenneville, something crazy like that. But none of that's happening.
Yeah, I my favorite thing about about Sullivan is that he made me forget about the guy before him. Like those were just.
And isn't Sully sort of like an SOB too? That's what I like. Like he comes out with that, you know. He's got that vinegar in his veins a little bit where he's just, you can see him, you can tell when he's perturbed with a question.
Yeah.
I love that. I don't like somebody that's just vanilla and bland all the time. I want to see his emotion on his sleeve a little bit. And I think he does that. I think he gets a buy-in from his guys. And I used to joke a couple years ago on the last cup run, his quotes, you could put them on posters on walls. It's like life coach stuff.
Right.
And that's kind of cool.
Yeah, well, speaking of coaches who you can tell what they're thinking by their quotes or not thinking by their quotes is Mike Tomlin. But let's switch to football. Let's talk a little football. We talked a little bit before, but I want to ask you a couple things that popped in my head as we were sitting there. I want to talk to you about. Number one, I swear, like maybe I had a fever dream, but the Browns considering Condoleezza Rice as their next head coach, that almost is like it smacks of like
what the hell is that?
Yeah, it smacks of like one of those. Remember when the Washington Wild Things they offered Barry Bonds a contract? Remember, it's
at
like
least he played baseball.
Exactly. They're operating like one of those, just sort of like like a minor league baseball team in like. Chattanooga or Cucamonga or all those small Midwest towns. It just seems weird. And the other thing, because we'll talk about these two things together, because the Condoleezza Rice is basically a throwaway. Redskins lose Alex Smith in a horrible injury, potentially career ending. So they need a quarterback. At least they feel they need a backup quarterback to back up Colt McCoy. You start looking on the free agent market. Once again, we don't see someone like Colin Kaepernick get a shot. We see Mark Sanchez get another shot. So that was the real. Like,
he throws a mean diet soda in the commercial. So maybe they were considering that.
Yeah, maybe they saw that like, wow, he's really been working on his drinking arm. The Rice thing obviously is baloney. It just kind of shows to what how far the Browns have fallen. But what do you make of the decision to hire or to bring on a guy like Sanchez when you've got a guy like Kaepernick? Now, granted, Kaepernick wasn't like, I'm not one of those. I support Kaepernick. For the beliefs and so forth and stuff like that. But I also am willing to agree that when he lost his starting job, he was having some struggles and so forth. But he's a young guy who you would think, if you look at all the guys who've gotten second chances in the NFL, what do you make of that? I mean, is he really committed that much of a sin that it's like that he can never come back from? Is that something?
Well, it's kind of weird because to your point, without considering anything, I feel like he started off as a really good player and for some reason lost his mojo. Yeah. Like in terms of pure football, he just didn't look the same anymore. And I don't know, it's almost like Robert Griffin in a way. Yeah. Because that was a guy that we all thought was going to end up turning into a great player, and he was for a short period of time, and then he fell. But I making that comparison, he still was a backup in the league this year. He was with the Ravens, I believe, and had a chance to maybe be a guy that was considered in the preseason as, hey, is he going to take the job here? He's playing so well. So when you look at it that way and you think about Nate Petermans of the world and guys like that getting caught on with teams, and finally Landry just caught on, I think, in Jacksonville a few weeks ago after he didn't get a job being cut by the Steelers. In terms of pure football, is he bad enough that you don't feel that he can even serve as your backup or your third string guy? Now, I'm going to assume, I'm not going to say this was a scenario where it's collusion, but at the same time, it sort of starts to look that way, doesn't it? Where
it does.
That the league is saying, oh, well, we can't take this guy. He's toxic right now, And do they just not want to have the the headache of dealing with that. And when I say headache, I don't mean because of his stances. I just mean there's a media spotlight that comes with that.
Yeah.
Because the first team that finally does take a chance, because that's how the NFL is.
Right.
Like, he's still so young. We could have 10 years of this waiting for them to outlive his football usefulness. Right. Are we going to go through this every season where his name comes up? I think somebody's finally going to say, you know what, let's bring him in. And it might happen next year in training camp. But it is mind-blowing to me that his football skills would be the main thing that you would say have eroded to the point that he's not capable of coming in and being any kind of useful to an organization. Right. So it has to be that you just don't want to deal with the media aspect that would come with it. Yeah. And that's a shame because you would love to see a guy like that with, you don't want to see anybody, because any stance they take costs them their livelihood, and that's what stinks.
Right, and Michael Vick got a second chance. Plaxico Burress got a second chance.
Think of all the NFL players.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not. Now, the only other thing you can think of, and it was completely two different things. I'm not comparing them.
Yeah.
Ray Rice never got a second chance, but it was such an egregious thing.
Right.
But Colin Kaepernick never hurt anybody.
Right. Are you going to put right? So you're basically right. You're putting him on the level of what Ray Rice did.
Yeah.
And I agree. Ray Rice probably doesn't deserve a second chance, but you're going to put Kaepernick on his level.
Yep.
And not give him the same opportunity that you gave to Mike. I think if Ray Caruth could still run, there's a team would sign Ray Caruth, recently paroled from prison for.
He only murdered one person, almost an unborn child. Too,
it's right. It's one of those stories. It's like, but
but he can catch.
Yeah, right. If Ray Caruth still had speed, I think he would get picked up. I really do.
Well, you know what's crazy about it is
Josh Gordon's another one.
If this is the way, and I thought it may have been Mark Madd made this point on his show at one point, and it's interesting. If any of these guys were working at a 7-Eleven, they wouldn't have lost their job.
Right.
And I get it. It's a privilege to play pro sports and all these kinds of things. But never on earth should you lose anything because of your belief, your political stance, anything. That's how I feel.
I'm the wrong guy to ask about that.
No, but I know. This man, he's a poster child. But, I mean, that's my thing. You should not lose your livelihood because of your stance on something. Whether you agree or disagree, you shouldn't lose your livelihood for it. I mean, if you punch a woman or you do this, okay, then we can talk. But, I mean, that's what's terrible. I mean, and that's what seems to be happening to him right now.
Yeah. I would hire Colin Kaepernick if he's
when you buy your first pro team.
When I buy my first pro team, right? Probably be the Browns. I mean,
but then again, his new coach,
exactly,
Condoleezza Rice would understand this.
Yeah,
was Don Lupree or Tim Robbins, none of these guys not available? They could go out there. Remember Don Lupree used to hawk that stuff in the midnight hours that you could start a small business at home like me. And it was like crazy, this little squirrely man.
Yeah.
But I mean, those were like these inspirational people that were they had available that could go and
Tony Robbins.
I'm not saying she's not a great leader of men, but a football coach, I don't know.
Yeah, it's just it's very strange.
She'll hire Colin when she gets that job done.
Oh well, yeah, maybe that's Kaepernick's chance, perhaps.
Condi did it. We don't know.
Right? Yeah. He's like, well, what does she know about football? It's a strange to Cleveland Browns.
See, I can't believe I set you up to be that. We could put you up.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even think. I should have. Yeah. I should have like you.
I don't really talk too much about what happened to me. I'm just kidding.
He died so that we could all live.
Something like that. But talking about second chances and attitudes, we were talking about this before the show. I brought up Ben Roethlisberger, and I watched the game on Sunday, as I'm sure a lot of us did, and it was like it really seemed to be. He didn't play well, obviously, for most of the game. But it really seemed to be an emotional roller coaster for Roethlisberger, watching him through that whole game, and then watching him, at the end kneeling on the ground with the game ball. And for a second, I'm like, oh, come on, guys, we gotta hold it. You gotta hold this win for Ben. Hold it for Ben. And then I'm like, hey, wait a minute. I don't like this guy. Why all of a sudden, why am I like,
You went for the Kellers. You went for the black and gold.
Exactly. Yeah. I went for the black and gold, but it's still, it's like, in some ways, we sort of forget about, that's what they always say. Once you win, you can pretty much wash away anything that you've done in the past. But it made me think about Roethlisberger's legacy. I mean, this could very well, and I think if they somehow get in and win a Super Bowl, I think Ben probably walks away. If not now, then maybe one more year. But still, I don't think he's long for the game. 15 seasons. I don't think he's got much longer.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think that Roethlisberger has done enough since all of his past indiscretions and issues? Do you think he's done enough to cement a more positive than negative legacy?
I mean, I would like to think to a certain extent, yeah. But as I told you before we went live, I have a friend who said, I won't follow the Steelers again until Ben Roethlisberger retires.
Right.
So I think there's still a group of people that,
Yeah.
you know, it's like it's like Jonah Hill's character in Superbad.
Yeah.
When he says, "Hey, try not to pee your pants," you know, and he goes, "That was in the 7th grade," and he's like, "People don't forget," you know.
Right.
So
Exactly.
I mean, it's sort of like that kind of thing, you know. Is that going to be in the back of people's minds? Of course. I mean, he had indiscretions. He had things that law enforcement was involved. He had all these different things.
Right.
Now, he didn't get actually charges filed. He didn't go to jail. He didn't have all that. Now, that's neither here nor there on where you fall with what really happened.
Right.
But from the time where he was a jerk, supposedly walking checks in Pittsburgh and treating waitstaff poorly and treating some teammates poorly, I feel like we've gotten a longer window of a more positive Ben Roethlisberger. Right. So at least in top of mind, you can think, well, he does great work to try and support K-9 units in fire. He does great work in the community otherwise. He has a family. He has young kids. He has done anything the Steelers have asked. He's put up with a lot in that regard. And I feel like he's been a very good soldier, so to speak, for the organization and for the community. Now, you'll never forget everything that came along with Ben Roethlisberger. But I think that you can look at it and say, okay, if nothing else, even if he did bad ever, he has at least tried to make amends for all that. And you can hang your hat on the fact that he's become a solid citizen and he looks to be what he will be, at least for the rest of his days, as a guy that seems like a good guy. And I've heard, I had a little insight of somebody I know that works in the car industry, and they dealt with him as a younger player and said, boy, that guy's a real jerk. And he'd come in and to be honest, I was told, like, he'd try and talk a certain way to impress certain people that were there. Right. Like, there was certain demographic working in the garage, and he'd sort of act like he knew what it was like to be them.
Gotcha.
You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that wasn't necessarily him either, but he was trying to put on a show. And then he dealt with him later and said, boy, he seems like a new guy.
Yeah.
So I guess any of us probably have things, not quite the things he has, but things in our past that you can look at and say, well, boy, this guy may have been a real crappy person at one point, or at least had crappy things happen or been involved with, and at least they tried to live their life the right way after. Because it's like we just said, second chances are nice. They're great stories. And I think he got one, and he got a chance to sort of revamp his image. I fully believe, and I'll go to my grave thinking this, that the Steelers got a PR firm involved early on. Yeah. Because there was a while where you went from hearing all this terrible stuff, the SI article and all that, to right away, Ben's getting married, he's settling down. And we're like, wait a minute.
Right. Yeah.
Last week, you know, he was like dancing with a stripper on the stage at cheerleaders.
Right.
You know?
And he had that press conference.
He never did that I know of.
That breast conference? Wow, thank you for that press conference where he showed up in that kind of like, you know, creeper brown velour shirt. His hair was, you know.
I did have a rack of those for us out behind the wall. I thought we could have worn those today.
Those would have been nice, actually. So my main issue with Roethlisberger is, so I feel partially the way you do, in that I felt like he's done enough to at least partially make up for his douchiness, which were, again, walking out on checks and, you know, riding around without a helmet on his motorcycle and generally, you know, treating fans not so good. My problem, and the reason I think I'll never be able to find I know I'll never be able to find the respect for him, and I know I'll never really be able to cheer for him, even though hypocritically so. I was done with football for a couple of years. I'm now back and I watch Steeler games and so forth. The one that really I think is the most telling moment with me and we're talking about, of course, the sexual assault allegations.
Oh yeah.
The first woman who came forward, the hotel hostess in Reno, there was such a campaign to victim shame her and to just attack her mental health and to really just sort of go after her and, you know, and to make a lot of the world think oh, this is just some, she's crazy. She's just
some
out for
loon or something,
publicity or a lawsuit or something like that. And then this other thing happens in Florida, and then other stories kind of come out.
Well, that's whenever I told you pre-show about the pylon mentality.
Yeah, correct.
Because I feel like at that point,
Yeah.
anybody then everybody's like, hey, well, that happened to me, or this,
Right.
because then everything comes out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
And was all of that stuff founded? Who knows?
Yeah.
But I mean, to your point, I agree. I mean,
Yeah,
you can't victim shame, you can't do it, and that's
exactly.
what made that worse.
And that's the one. And then they ended up, after saying they would never pay her a nickel, they settled that for an undisclosed amount of money. And
Sounds
she
like some
kind
nickels
of
exchanged hands.
exactly right, exactly. There was a settlement. Correct. There was undisclosed. But let me say there was a settlement. And she basically she said, obviously kind of like, look, I told you that this was who the guy was. So for me, like, I'll never be able to look at him the same way or ever think, like, he's a guy, I will say, that after these things happened, and again, I know he was never charged, I don't think he ever should have been allowed to play football again. I put that on the Ray Rice level. But again, here we are, and like I said, I got caught up in the moment on Sunday, and I'm like,
well, let me ask you this.
yeah.
Football stuff aside,
Yeah.
looking at straight football, will you end up missing Ben as the player when he's gone? Maybe not home, maybe not road Ben, but
yeah, right, right. No, I mean you certainly will. I'm saying you generally, not specifically me, even though I know you're asking me specifically. I'm willing to, and I was willing to take a few crappy seasons to sort of just
move on,
move on and wash our hands. If somebody else wanted him, fine, take him. But it's just amazing how, and again, that's something that I've always worked on with myself is that, to like sort of like put players and to put athletes or so forth up on, a pedestal. And that was as a youngster. I know we all were when we were young. When I was young, of course I did that. I did that a ton. Steve Garvey, for some reason. Steve Garvey was my first sort of deified baseball, or my first deified athlete. But yeah, it's just, I honestly start to really, it bothers me, and I start to really not like myself at this point. I think when I'm watching, him, and I'm thinking like, because for us to be successful, he has to be successful.
Yeah.
And so it's a tough thing. And so, and as I see him, like I said, his career is obviously winding down. So I think you start to think about those things more. And
yeah, like the legacy, as you mentioned, that was your whole point of that.
Right.
And it's when you look at the body of work, and that's part of it. And I feel like a lot of fans, the biggest issue with them maybe letting him slide, and this is the sucky part about life.
Yeah.
It's so far in the rear view. They almost they don't think about it. It's
exactly
out of sight, out of mind. I don't remember that anymore.
Right.
Hey, this is now a 2-time Super Bowl winner. He's been there 3 times, whatever. It's like he's this guy, and Ben. So, I mean, I think that's part of it. And it would be interesting to see when he does hang him up, if somebody writes it like a career retrospective and says, hey, he revamped from being, a piece of crap kind of person and through this, or they bring that up, or if that comes back to light, because I think certainly based on the way the world is today, it would have been viewed differently had it happened today than when it did.
That's correct. You're right. If what happened today, you're right. We'd be in a much different
and he may have been Colin Kaepernick. Yeah,
exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Well, we had it was a great show. We had some laughs, and now I'm like, oh, Jesus.
Well, wait, how can we pick you back up?
I don't know. Let's talk more about how I'm saving journalism, Brian.
Can we talk with accents again? Will that do it?
Yeah, we'll do it. All right, you've been watching the Pittsburgh Current Podcast with me, Charles Dage, and my guest brought you Metzer.
We're like the Dreadnoughts.
We are. I'm actually good because my English accent came back a little bit. I gave it away to do an Irish accent. I've been working on that for years.
Yeah,
and I can't do both usually.
Well, the bad thing is when you try and do like Scottish or English, whatever, it bleeds. It just bleeds.
I can't do Scottish
because then you bleed into Australian a little bit too. It's very easy to do.
Yeah, I've always been like big on like pantomime since I was little, and like Scottish is like used to be Irish, but now Scottish is like I'm like I can do that. I know I can do it.
I respect the hell out of that.
To no purpose. I mean, what the hell am I going to do with that?
All that stuff. What do you mean? That's a life skill.
It might be. I guess.
You'd be great for radio. We could be like, hey, we're bringing in the Hilltopper. He has some great insight.
Hey, Brian, it's been good having you on the show, lad. Okay, chap. This has been the Pittsburgh Current Podcast. Check out our Giving Thanks issue on newsstands now, and give to some of those, or go against our advice in the book, and find your own. Yeah, give till it hurts a little bit at least, and have a happy Thanksgiving, the start of the holiday season, and we will see you next week for a very special Pittsburgh Current Podcast. We'll be talking about the KSWA Fan Fest and Gift Holiday Toy Drive. We are the official media sponsor for that, so make sure that you check out our Facebook page for information on that, and also the KSWA Facebook page. And we will be live there on December 1st, and we'll be taking that in. But next week we'll have some folks from KSWA in, and we'll be talking about their big annual show. So I'm Charlie Deach, editor, publisher of Pittsburgh Current. Have a great holiday.